LinkedIn did a survey of over 6,000 respondents from 25 to 33 years old, and 75% of them reported that they felt like they were going through a quarter-life crisis, which is understandable because especially in that period of your life, and you can go through that type of feeling and situation at any point in your life. But really when there's these big transitional moments, whether it's a new career or break up from a relationship that you had for a long time or move into a new city, whatever it is, that there is this feeling like you want to turn to whatever you can to try to escape those feelings, or at least to try to just give yourself some peace from them. Because when you feel like you don't have control, or there's all these external circumstances that are dictating how you feel and there's not much that you can do about it, it can be easy to turn to things like alcohol, other substances, pharmaceuticals, and all these things to try to numb some of that pain or discomfort or stress as much as we can, because those feel like things that we are in control over. So in this video, I want to talk about how you could use what I like to call constructive escapism rather than destructive escapism, so that you can not only feel more free in the moment, but also create some habits and create a routine of activities that will end up leading you into a better position long-term, rather than one that feels like you're more stuck in the same routine as you already have been without any sort of meaningful change in how you're feeling on the inside. And really what I always like to think about is this quote from Napoleon Hill, who said, "Every challenge or setback carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit." And that's how I like looking at some of these moments in life, or these cycles that we go through, and how we could use them for something that is now a transformational coping mechanism, rather than one that makes us feel more stuck and more hopeless the longer that it goes on. So there are a lot of different things that we can turn to in order to try to make us feel a little better in the short term. And that's what I like thinking of between the constructive versus destructive escapism, because both of them are habits that in the short term are very effective either way, because the ultimate goal is to have some sort of self-soothing, right, in the moment. And it's nice for the time being, right? But the difference is one is going to build you up over time, and the other is going to break you down, whether it's your health, your mindset, the fact that it's not actually changing anything about you or the circumstances or how you view yourself in your life. Whereas constructive is going to be beneficial in multiple ways, which is in the short term, you can perform these activities, which really are meant to get you as engaged in the activity as possible, so that you can get into a flow state. And that way you can just put your mind at ease, to where your problems essentially just dissolve away. Anytime you've done anything super creative, or maybe even anything very physical in nature that you have to put a lot of thought and focus into, time seems to just slip away. And that's really what you're going for. Because as well, in these constructive escapism activities, not only do you lose track of all those other things, but you feel really good in the moment. And it brings peace of mind in the moment. Whereas with some of these other activities, again, if you turn to substances like alcohol or other pharmaceuticals, like I mentioned before, or even worse, just repression, where you're running away from your problems and not actually ever acknowledging them, what you're doing is the difference between creating peace of mind in the moment rather than essentially having peace from mind in the moment. because again, you're just trying to run away from these things. And over the long term, what happens is those moments, those short-term actions, if you're engaging in destructive habits or behaviors, it takes more and more of them for you to have that same sort of response, because we get used to them. And so on the other hand, when you're engaging in things that are actually lifting you up, right, and making you feel good in the moment, and also losing track of all these other things, the more that you engage in those activities, the better that you're going to get. So that those short-term benefits actually become even greater, because the more you engage in those activities, the easier it is, the better you get at them. So that kind of time traveling that you naturally go through when you're so immersed in that activity, your concentration and your focus gets better, and so those expand. So when you first start, it's kind of difficult, because if you're going through all these things in life, it's kind of hard to focus on things or put a lot of energy towards something, which is understandable because your motivation may be low. So maybe you can only do that for, say, 15 minutes the first time. But even if you get that little bit of a success from it and you do it again, and the more you do it, that 15 minutes can turn to 25, to 35, and even longer in some cases, especially depending on the activity and how easy it may be for you to get into a flow state without getting too fatigued or lose focus or whatever. But again, it gets better. On the other hand, like I said, when you see all these little red circles, is just like anybody who has taken, even if, like, say, caffeine, for example, you drink however many cups, in a day, and that may feel like it gives you the benefit or the bump that you need. But the more often you do that, it takes more and more and more, because your tolerance grows. So then you need even more to get the same effect that you did before, which is why turning to those types of destructive behaviors is just futile in the long term, because really you're just creating this endless cycle that is just a deeper and deeper pit. Versus engaging in flow state activities is going to create an upward spiral where it's not only going to benefit your physical health, but also your mental health. And again, in the moment, you're losing track of all of the problems that you had. And so I want to dive into how you can pick and choose which activities will be beneficial for that effect, and also how you can potentially, if you're doing them already, change them or view them a little differently to make them more effective as a flow state activity, so that you can escape from all your problems in the moment without doing it in a way that is either irrational or not beneficial for your long-term health. So starting with 4 key elements to flow state activities. The first one is they have to require skills. So even if you look at something that's non-physical, which to start with, I would recommend the best things that you can do will be something that is physical in nature, which is why I can't recommend exercise enough. In my opinion, that's going to be the top of the list. Anytime you add something that's physical in nature as well, there are so many more sensory inputs that's going into the activity, because you have movement and you have tactile, right, sensory components to it, as well as your focus that has to coordinate all of these different things. And so all the information that's coming up into your brain, it has to be funneled into that activity. So then all these other things in your life that are going on at that moment have to fade away for you to be totally engrossed in the movement or in the activity. But now, even if you think of something that is less physical in nature, something like reading, which is a great activity to do as well, It requires a skill to know how to read, to know how to understand and interpret language, right? And then even having depending on what you're reading, but the cognitive component of interpreting what the message is, right? And then understanding what the author is trying to say. So those in itself are skills as well. But the other reason why something more physical in nature is important, and why I think you should start with exercise, is that you need the right amount of challenge. And so having, say, exercise is great because you can really adjust the challenge to meet your needs. Because as it's said in sports psychology, there's this inverted U hypothesis for optimal functioning or for best performance, which states that there has to be this right amount of challenge, because if it's not challenging enough, then you won't focus enough on the task at hand, and therefore you're too bored and you don't rise to the level of the occasion because it doesn't really warrant that. Versus if something is too challenging, right, then you get to anxiety, and then you're thinking too much, and there's too much stuff going on, too much processing going on in your brain for you to actually perform as best as you can, which is why there is this optimal functioning, which is the right amount of challenge so that you rise to the level, but you don't fall to the level of the challenge as well. So that is important. And as well, the other thing that benefits that as well, when you get the right amount of challenge, is now you can immerse yourself in that activity even more. So you become less immersed if it's too challenging, because again, you're all up in your head. And as well, if it's not challenging enough, because there's nothing exciting you to just really fully dive into it. And the benefit of that is that right amount of challenge to fully immerse yourself in the activity is that, as I've already mentioned before, which is the greater immersion that you have into the activity, in the task at hand, the lower the self-consciousness becomes. Because again, the more you lose yourself in the task, the more you lose your problems along with it. And so finally, that all ties back again to what I've been mentioning before, is just the focus. Being able to turn off everything else, or at least just give yourself a set amount of time that you really say, okay, I'm just going to do this thing. Everything else can wait 10, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, so that you can really be there in the moment. And when doing so, put the process of what you're doing as the priority, right? So that is on the pedestal in the hierarchy of importance, is doing what you're doing for the sake of getting better at it, rather than what you're getting results-wise in that moment. And I mean that specifically to the task at hand. If it is exercise or working out or reading or something creative, if it's woodworking, things like that, if you're new to it, you're not going to be great, and that's okay. But if you're putting the emphasis on the results of what you're doing, then it's easy to get like disheartened by the activity, because all you're thinking about is, I'm not as good as I would like to be, or that didn't really turn out that great. But again, that's all part of it. The more you do, the better you get, and the more immersed you get into the activity, the more it becomes just enjoyable for the sake of just doing it. But that takes time to build. But if you put the emphasis on just being okay with doing the thing, right, and having the goal of just getting better, then that itself can be enjoyable as well, even if the results aren't great. Because now you're creating a baseline that you're very aware of, and you're going to be able to notice those improvements over time. And that itself can become very addicting in nature. And then going back to long term, of why that is a perfect constructive escapism activity, because now you get addicted to wanting to see improvements in yourself for this specific thing, right? And then you get all these other rewards, right? These dopamine rewards that your brain is naturally, providing for you, because it feels good to put effort into something and work hard at something and then see yourself get better, right? So it's very self-rewarding in nature. But again, whatever you choose, make sure exercise and something physical is one of the activities. Now here's a simple process-oriented framework for you to build on those constructive escapism activities. And this is where you can take those short-term, moments of practice that you're performing and then turning it into an upward spiral, so that you're not only doing it for the sake of doing it one time to make everything else feel a little bit better in life and to give your mind something else to focus on in the short term, but then to give you something that you could actually look forward to doing in the future and look forward to how you're going to see the benefits in your own life. And so step one is to set goals for that activity. Wherever you start, where do you want it to go? How do you want to see yourself develop throughout this process? And that's why it's important to take that baseline that I had mentioned before, because you need to know where you started, because it's going to be challenging, right? And things get frustrating, of course, whenever you're trying to learn something. And there's always going to be this initial excitement when you start, and then this kind of dip, because then you start realizing, oh, this is a steeper learning curve potentially than what I thought it was going to be. So then by putting the focus on the process and measuring the progress, no matter how small it may be, gives you a little bit more of a 1,000-foot view of exactly where those data points are in terms of your progression, so that you could actually see it. Whereas without doing that, you don't really know. And it's a lot harder for us to see that in ourselves than if somebody else were to say, hey, that looks a lot better than when I saw you do that 2 weeks ago. We don't always have that. So you need to be able to do that for yourself. And that way too, if there is certain parts of the activity that you feel like you're better at than others, feel free to adjust it, right? Or change what you're doing so that you can maybe even focus on the weak points that you have rather than the strong points. Or if there is a certain activity, and let's just say it's exercise, and maybe you started with lifting weights, and that was okay because you were doing the thing, right? You were engaging in this activity. But if it doesn't quite feel like you wanted it to, like when you left, you didn't quite feel refreshed, or you didn't have that sense of enjoyment, right, or success from leaving, maybe you start changing it up to then you do mostly, cardio type activities, or you start changing up your workouts so that you get the feeling that you were looking for. And then over time, you can start adding those other activities back in based on when you feel ready for it. And then with that as well, however you refine it or however you need to adjust, then put the focus on that aspect. And again, see yourself improving, and then have a little bit more of a narrow focus on how can I improve, one variable. And then when you do that, then move on to the next one, so that you can really make, the overall improve by making small adjustments in between, right? So that everything, if you just make one thing 10% better and another thing 10% better, the whole is going to improve along with it. And as you see yourself improving and you see the progress as you've been measuring go in the direction that you want, then you naturally have to increase the amount of challenge, so you don't move from optimal performance back into boredom, right? Once you kind of move that way where you start feeling like this is getting easier and I don't have to focus on it enough or as much as I did before, then you change the challenge so that that focus, right, has to adjust along with it and really push yourself to be, the best that you can at what you're doing. And then over time, which eventually will result in what's called unselfconscious self-assurance, which essentially states that even though you're not good at this thing now, and you've never done it before, and you're not even quite sure how you're going to do it or become successful in that thing, the more often you have these moments in your life where on a whole, maybe you go through this crisis and you need to find your way out, or even if it's as simple as what we're talking about here, of these small activities that you're not good at, but you decide I want to get good at it. The self-assurance part comes in when you can honestly say to yourself, I don't know how to do it right now, and I'm not very good at it, but I'm confident that I'm going to be resourceful enough that I'm going to figure it out eventually. And I won't quit until I do. The more often, right, you have those experiences in your life, then the next time something like that comes up, you have this unself-conscious self-assurance that says, okay, this is tough, right? And I'm being challenged to the point where I feel like life is stressful, and this hasn't happened to me before, but I know I'm going to get through it. And the more you see yourself win in that way and overcoming those challenges, the easier it is to just view yourself as a winner, or rather you just feel like you have the confidence in yourself that even if you don't know what to do, eventually you'll become a winner. And the whole point of this video and the idea of the constructive escapism is that you want to create a lifestyle around not only this mindset, but the resourcefulness to be able to overcome these things when they happen, because you have that ability within you. And the way I look at creating a lifestyle around those types of behaviors is this idea that there are always things that we have to do, there are things that we want to do, and the things that we get to do. And the lifestyle is essentially the center point of all of those different things. And so when you have some that are outweighing the others, in that the things that you have to do and the things that are just naturally happening to you don't allow you to go do the things that you want to do or the things that you get to do, because you become so stressed and demotivated or feeling like you're in a depressed state that you don't even have the energy for it. It's important to create a lifestyle around what are called dissipative structures in your life that are always there no matter what, whether you're going through a tough time or not, because if they're always there and they're always present, when tough times come and go, you are a lot more sturdy and strong in weathering the storm, rather than feeling like you have to, seek out shelter when the storm is coming. If you're always the shelter, then you can weather what's coming, whether or not it's good or bad. And that is really the whole basis of this idea, which is to be able to turn chaos into order. And a better example as well is this idea that the sun is always dissipating energy and heat, but it is not used unless it's a plant or unless you have solar panels, which is the beauty of those objects, for one, in the case of the solar panel, but organism in the case of the plants, is that they have found a way to take what all this unused excessive energy was being put out, and then being able to harness it into very productive and useful things that just benefit our life, whether it's from the plant's perspective of how they survive, and even for us, how we survive to be able to harness that energy and, power where we live and be able to do all these things that entertain us and all the devices that we have now. These dissipative structures are now able to harness all this chaotic energy, like is what happens if you're going through a quarter-life crisis. There's all this anxiety, right, or stress, or the worrying about the future, and there's nothing to do with all of that pent-up energy unless we have something that we can channel it into, which again goes back to the transformational coping aspect of this whole thing, is that we could use that negative energy. We just need to channel it right in the most productive way as possible, because just even though it's negative energy, right, and it's not things that we prefer to feel, it could be very powerful, and it will, move us in the right direction so that again we can help ourselves create these strategies that will improve our well-being and confidence in the long term, right? And especially for when the next ones come around. But without it, would those things have ever have happened? Who's to say, right? But a lot of times these negative emotions and events in life can become super transformational, because those were the things that actually got us to move. Sometimes we need enough pain in our life to actually motivate us to do the thing that we've been thinking about doing, or maybe it's been in the back of our mind, but it just never became important enough until now. And so if you made it this far, thank you for watching the video. I do want to recommend a book. It's called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I don't think I said that correctly, but a lot of the terms and ideas that I used in this video were from that book, and it's called Flow. So if you're interested in that book, I'll put that in the description where you can find it, and put the author's name and spell it correctly, because I didn't say that right. And so I highly recommend that as a read, and diving more deeply into that content as well. Also, if you feel like you need a little bit more help in terms of having some structure around creating constructive escapist activities or constructive escapism activities in your life, and use that in sort of the measuring progress and trying to improve on it over time, I also have a link in the description for a lifestyle reset checklist to help you kind of organize your day, maybe gamify that process a little bit so that you can keep track of the activities that you're doing and how you feel week by week. And that'll also be in the description as well. And again, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.